Good morning again, and on behalf of the Washington County Chamber, our board, and our staff, I'd like to wish everybody a Happy New Year and welcome you all to our first morning briefing of 2021. Today's morning briefing is brought to you through the generous support of our sponsors, Range Resources, Community Bank, and Energy Transfer. So as always, we like to thank our sponsors for their support of our programming. I'm Will Tomeyer, Director of Economic and Tourism Development here at the Chamber, and I'd like to welcome our guest, Alex Halper, who is the Director of Government Affairs for the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. Good morning, Alex, and thanks for joining us.
Well, good morning to you, Will, and to everyone, and thanks for having me.
Awesome. So I guess we'll just dive right in. If you wouldn't mind maybe telling us a little bit about yourself and your background and your role with the PA Chamber.
Sure, and yeah, thanks again for this invitation. I was scheduled to be with you all, I think April of last year, and obviously disappointed that had to be postponed, and still hoping to get out your way. But in the meantime, I'm very excited we have this chance to connect remotely. So as you said, I'm with the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. We're the statewide Chamber of Commerce, the largest broad-based business advocacy association in Pennsylvania. We have about 10,000 members, employers that cross really all industry sectors in every region of Pennsylvania. And our focus is primarily advocacy, public policy advocacy, primarily at the state level, but also at the federal level. Among those 10,000 members are also about 100 local and regional chambers of commerce, including the Washington County Chamber of Commerce, and we appreciate very much your partnership over the years. Our chamber partners are a critical part of our broader membership. You all have the clout with your elected officials and are extremely effective advocates, and we've really been grateful for the partnership over the years, but especially over the last few months. And it's been gratifying to see how the chamber community has really stepped up on behalf of your members.
Thanks, Alex. I appreciate you saying that, and likewise, we're always very grateful for our partnership with you guys. Obviously, with the organization your size, your resources and help that you can sort of pass out to the other chambers around the state is always very helpful. Along those lines, I've been hearing and reading a lot about the Pennsylvania Chamber's Bringing Back Pennsylvania initiative. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what that is and how it might benefit Washington County's businesses.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about bringing PA back. This was an initiative that we kicked off fairly early on during the course of the pandemic, and initially really had sort of two areas of focus. I'm sure many of your members and those here this morning can sympathize and relate to early on, and continues to this day, just this so many different mandates and new guidelines and regulations coming from various levels of government being imposed on businesses, and just the how complicated and difficult we were finding for many employers to figure out what they were responsible for, what was expected of them, and in some cases what their rights as employers were. So we early on started to organize and really distill a lot of that information that was coming in, so that employers had as clear and as updated information as possible, again, for not only what what was expected of them in terms of mandates from the federal and state government, but also guidelines and resources that we hoped would help them sustain their operations and ensure, to the extent possible, the health and safety of themselves, their employees, and their customers. Part of bringing PA back was also early on a focus on advocacy. We started recognizing very early on that that the business community perspective was critical as policymakers were passing laws or any kind of policy that was impacting businesses. So we were engaged in that advocacy very early on, and that was really kind of the core of bringing PA back, and has been something that we've really focused on over those months. That continues to this day. We are kind of entering in a next phase of bringing PA back that is more broader public policy agenda to not only sustain businesses, but to set Pennsylvania up to really lead the national charge in economic recovery. So a broad agenda related to competitiveness, to improving our infrastructure and workforce, and all about creating equality of opportunity for Pennsylvania residents. So that is going to include outreach and solicitation from employers, so we know what employers need, what policies will be most helpful. We'll be monitoring our progress and providing advocacy opportunities for businesses and for chambers as we look to push this agenda in Harrisburg.
Well, you kind of read my mind there, because one of my next questions was about how businesses, across the economy have definitely experienced the pandemic in different ways. Obviously, like the restaurant and hospitality industries have been completely hammered, not only through loss of customers and people traveling and things like that, but also with the government, shutting down one industry as opposed to the other. And so I was curious, like, what type of policy recommendations the PA Chamber is sort of championing to help the economic recovery as we kind of pull out of this pandemic.
Yeah, it's a great question, and as you kind of allude to, our economy and Pennsylvania, I think in particular, one of our strengths is a very diverse economy. That in the past has helped the Commonwealth weather economic storms, I think, better than a lot of other states. But that diversity also means that a pro-employer legislative agenda is often pretty broad and diverse as well. And because we represent that full range of employers, it really means focusing on quite a few areas. One issue in particular that's been a focus for almost the entire year last year, but continues to be a priority into this year, is related to liability protections. There's a significant concern among, again, a really broad range of employers. Businesses, yes, but also really a focus on the education community and nonprofits and child care centers. A lot of employers worried that despite the significant investments they're making in workplace safety and in all the health protocols, a concern that they're going to be targeted by unfair or unwarranted litigation sometime in the future. And that, whether they've already been subject to this or it's just kind of a looming threat, we do fear that is something that could hold back economic recovery. There was a really remarkable coalition that came together, over 70 statewide associations representing all these groups, local governments, higher education, childcare centers, et cetera, supporting legislation in Harrisburg. Also over 80 chambers of commerce including the Washington County Chamber, Peters Township Chamber, a number in your region supporting legislation. There was bipartisan support. We were disappointed, to say the least, that the bill, which did get to the governor's desk, was ultimately vetoed. But that remains high on our agenda coming into this coming session. Beyond that, truly, it's a lot of the areas that we have focused on in the past, but their importance is really highlighted now. Smarter tax policy, regulatory reform. Ensuring that DEP's permitting process is conducive to economic recovery, and finally, what has been our top policy priority for a couple years now, and was maybe not as much of a focus because of the crisis based on the pandemic and shutdown orders, but our workforce, and just working with stakeholders to ensure that employers who are hiring have qualified applicants to fill open positions. That was a problem pre-pandemic. It is currently a challenge, and it's going to be one for the foreseeable future, unless there are, is a concerted strategic effort from the private sector, the public sector, from the education community to really tackle our workforce challenges.
All right, that's great. Yeah, I think those are all very important things, especially to the business community. So I wish you luck in that as you're navigating the halls of Harrisburg. I wanted to remind our viewers and listeners that if you have any questions that you'd like for Alex, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We've had a couple questions roll in, and we saved a few minutes at the end of this program for the Q&A with Alex. So go ahead and put your questions in now. Alex, Governor Wolf has 2 years left in his term, roughly, and the Senate and House both just seated Republican majorities for the next 2-year session. How do you think this will, or do you think this will impede progress on COVID recovery policies and these other legislative goals that you've mentioned? Or do you think that this split in government will provide some room and motivation for compromise on these issues and be critical, or that will be critical to our business community and the Commonwealth in general?
Yeah, it's another good question, and I guess I'd say that the two, at least we hope, are not, it's not mutually exclusive. We are in divided government, as you noted. The Republicans retained control of both the House and the Senate. Amazingly, after so much, such an interesting election cycle, very little changed in Harrisburg. There remains about a 112 to 90 Republican majority in the state House, essentially 29 to 21 Republican majority in the Senate. And of course, the governor is a Democrat. So that is going to inevitably create moments of disagreement, moments of tension. This session has kicked off with some of those moments. A Tuesday of last week on swearing-in day in Harrisburg, there was a little bit of a dust-up on the Senate floor, a disagreement over swearing in a new or a state senator where the election was still a little bit undecided. That senator has, by the way, been was sworn in yesterday, but there was a screaming match on the Senate floor last week. Now, of course, the way the week progressed, our little dust up in the Pennsylvania State Senate seemed like child's play compared to what was happening, tragically in the rest of the country. But in addition to that, the legislature has started early on with legislation that we know the governor disagrees with. There's a debate over the governor's powers during an emergency declaration. So last session, the House and Senate passed a constitutional amendment to sort of limit those powers to require the governor. The governor right now has declared a state of emergency and has reauthorized that declaration multiple times, since March. And those powers give him the ability to do a lot of the things that he's been able to do with the economy. The legislature's pushed back, and now their focus is on this constitutional amendment, and that is making its way through the process already. One of the first bills that it seems to be moving is this constitutional amendment. If it gets passed by the House and Senate in time, it will go before voters could go before voters in the May primary in the form of a referendum and actually amend the Constitution. So I say all that because the early indications are that some of the tension that existed between the legislature and the governor, do not seem to have dissipated during the interim between last legislative session and this legislative session. At the same time, what often goes unreported or unnoticed are all these other areas where there is very close coordination and agreement between the governor and the legislature in a myriad of policy areas. Workforce development, being one of them. There were a number of bills passed last session related to career awareness for high school students, workforce development, things like criminal justice reform to help facilitate employment for those who were recently incarcerated or those who are going to be re-entering communities to make sure that they are best positioned to have jobs and hopefully avoid recidivism. So it's kind of a little bit of both is my way of getting around your good question, but I think we're going to see continued headbutting in some areas, but hopefully there can be some compartmentalization where on one day there's fighting and maybe on the next day coming together on some important priorities.
Yeah, I think with the big challenges ahead of us that there's definitely going to have to be some common ground found, and I'm sure they'll find a way to do it. Alex, as you know, South Point Business Park out here in Washington County is the largest employment center in the county. And over the last, almost year, the buildings here have been largely empty due to the pandemic and the most businesses pivot toward working from home and remote working for their employees. What kind of feedback have you been getting from your members on a statewide basis on the future of work, future of office work, I should say, once the pandemic subsides? And have you been getting a sense on how businesses are going to plan to operate going forward?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's a very common theme statewide, and certainly, South Point is not the only business district that is experiencing these challenges. They're all, they're really everywhere. I guess it's been. I've noticed kind of an evolution of perspectives from businesses with the question of, how will we, either maintain what has changed during the course of the pandemic. I think early on, for a lot of employers, the idea of going fully remote seemed almost impossible for lots of employers that we were talking to. Others, I think it was a very smooth pivot, but for some, it just was completely foreign concept and seemed like it had the potential for disaster. That, in many ways, the feedback we got sort of evolved over the months, and I think a lot of employers saying, we're making this work. This is not as bad as we thought. We give our people a lot of credit for how flexible they've been in making this change. And I think that really started employers thinking, gosh, could this be a long-term approach to how we run our business? Obviously, there's some, there may be some cost savings there, maybe some efficiencies. But I will say probably over the last couple months, even some of those same businesses who maybe have come back and said, as much as we are encouraged by how well our people have made that transition, it's not the same. There is something inherently positive about being together, and some of the synergies that exist when a workforce, and the collaboration of being in person. It's not as tangible. It's not as sort of quantifiable of what the benefit is, but just this kind of gut instinct that it does exist. So I think when things all settle down, I think you'll see a mix. But the predictions that everyone is going to stay remote for the long run, um, you know, or are going to completely, permanently stop the, work travel and conferences. I just don't buy it. I think there is a value to those things that employers kind of recognize, even while they're encouraged that they've been able to sustain things under this situation. Um, Maybe that's just my optimistic view because I'm anxious to get back to Washington County and be with you all in person.
I'm with you 100%. I'm going to every conference, every meeting, every happy hour that I can get to as soon as
Yeah,
we're allowed.
yeah. I think
Um,
that's common. It's a common feeling right now.
I do too. Well, one business that cannot work from home is manufacturing. And we know how important manufacturing is, not only in Washington County, but across the state. It's an industry that has a huge multiplier effect and crosses obviously lots of industries. And as the pandemic kind of unfolded around us and we had these interruptions in supply chains and uh, manufacturing operations, there was a lot of talk about reshoring manufacturing from overseas, back to back to the United States. Um, and so, what are you hearing about that long term? And do you see that there are some opportunities for Pennsylvania to attract some of these operations back from overseas to help, reshore manufacturing here in the States?
Yeah, I mean, you're correct that has been a growing topic of conversation. It's something that people seem to talk about a lot, and has not always been, has not always progressed past the concept phase. So I'm hopeful that one of the silver linings from this disaster, from this tragedy, will be a recognition of the benefits to domestic manufacturing. I know back, I think in around October, the certain members of the Pennsylvania House Republican Caucus launched what they were calling the Commonwealth COVID comeback plan. In fact, one of your local representative, Josh Kale, who has parts of Washington County, I think, was part of that group, and he and one of the key parts of that agenda was related to reshoring and incentivizing manufacturers to through tax abatements or job creation tax credits to open operations in sort of targeted areas within Pennsylvania. That we've seen examples around the state where smart tax policy can attract those types of businesses. So I do think that perhaps perhaps more than ever, there is this sort of confluence of circumstances that will actually lead businesses to initiate, reshoring efforts or to locate businesses in the United States. And of course, that's why we're doing what we do in terms of trying to improve Pennsylvania's business climate. The businesses are not just going to show up, and they're certainly not just going to pick Pennsylvania, um, out of the kindness of their heart. Pennsylvania, as we've talked about over the years, has some tremendous advantages, natural advantages. You all know that in Washington County, maybe more than anybody, our natural resources, top among them, but also our geographic, advantages, and our transportation systems. We need a public policy agenda that complements those natural advantages, whether it's related to tax policy, or our labor and legal climate, or workforce that can hopefully seal the deal on some of these efforts related to either manufacturing or reshoring specifically. Manufacturers have definitely been one of the unsung heroes of this pandemic. We heard so many examples of manufacturers who kind of reoriented their facilities to produce PPE, to start producing medical equipment. I don't think the general public recognizes how challenging that is, but it happened, and it happened in Pennsylvania, and our businesses here ought to be applauded for it.
I couldn't agree with you more. We had many examples of that here in Washington County. In fact, my favorite one is our local whiskey distilleries switched over to hand sanitizer and made hand sanitizer and donated it to our local hospitals, which was pretty cool.
That's awesome. I hope they're all prepared to switch back, quickly, especially in time for all the Will's happy hours once things settle down. But no, that is great to hear, and really, really inspiring.
That is. So we're running a little close on time, but I want to get to a couple of questions that we got from the audience, and one that we received several times is about the state budget, and with the deficit looming, but also with federal stimulus funding maybe coming down for the states and things like that. What do you think the state budget picture is looking like in June?
Well, early indications, and this has been the case for the last few cycles of difficult budget cycles, and I think the 2021-2022 budget, which will have to be passed by June 30th, it's going to be a challenge. The State Senate Appropriations Committee chairman just a couple weeks ago predicted about a $3.5 billion deficit, which is daunting. You're right that one of the unknowns and the X factors is funding from the federal government. That was a piece that was left out of the most recently passed disaster relief package. I mentioned before our efforts at the state level to pass liability protections. It just shows you how critical that is for Pennsylvania's and the national economy. U.S. Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell talked about, if they don't get liability protections, then they're not going to include funding for state and local governments. That's how high the stakes are. Unfortunately, both items got left out. So the budget is going to be difficult. As employers, we need to be advocating for smart policies that can encourage job growth and job creation to drive state revenues. And that to me is what we can do at this point. But there's no doubt it's going to be another difficult budget cycle.
One of our other questions that we got, Alex, and this will be the last one, I think, is what can businesses and individuals do with respect to those liability protections and other policy proposals? Contact legislators, connect with the chambers. I mean, what do you suggest?
I'd suggest everything you already mentioned, but the follow up with legislators is critical. Both, as I mentioned earlier, both the House and the Senate passed a liability protections bill last year. It was House Bill 1737. And there were members who voted for that and members who voted against it. And our governor, unfortunately, vetoed it. This was legislation that said, if you're a business and you're adhering to state and federal health and safety guidelines to protect your people and your customers, you should not be targeted with an unfair, lawsuit that's impossible to defend against. Lawmakers, either way how they voted, need to hear from you. They need to hear a big, loud thank you if they voted the right way. And if they voted the wrong way, it needs to be respectful and cordial, but it needs to be, we hope you're with us next time because these are critically important. And it's not just corporations, it's childcare centers, it's schools, etc. So that follow-up and advocacy to legislators is paramount. Everyone can do it, and it makes a huge difference. And I would suggest strongly supporting your local Chamber of Commerce because they're doing all those things, whether you know it or not, and going to bat for you, when it really counts.
Thanks, Alex. I appreciate that plug.
That was not something you texted me to say. But I
Not
already.
at all.
You all do a tremendous job down in Washington County, and it makes a huge difference, and we do appreciate it.
Well, thank you for saying that, and the feeling is likewise. We really appreciate our partnership with you guys, and obviously appreciate you joining us this morning. So thank you again for being here, and thank you to everybody who joined us on the webinar. Hopefully you learned something from Alex today. I would like to again thank our sponsors, Range Resources, Energy Transfer, and Community Bank. And also remind everybody that we will be back again in 2 weeks for another morning briefing with Mr. Jeff Bird of Tall Timber Media Group. And Jeff is the publisher of Developing Pittsburgh. He'll be here to talk about the real estate market in the region, both currently and in an outlook toward the future. So thank you again for joining us for the Washington County Chamber of Commerce morning briefing, and we'll see you next time.